A Differed Dream Deferred. Part 2. A sterile white room. Daniel lay on the familiar bunk. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he could make out someone standing to his right. He didn't know why, but he felt a wave of disappointment and tragedy wash over him. "How do you feel?" A steady masculine voice spoke, bridging the gulf between the two worlds. Daniel attempted to answer but found his voice choked with melancholy. "You're all right. You've been out for some time. Perhaps you'll feel like talking later, A man of military bearing, wearing a badge and holstering a weapon, joined the individual. They whispered a moment, and Daniel considered his position. He felt it painful to move, and could feel that his arms, torso, and lower legs were strapped tight to the bed. A mist seemed to hang about the room, and he could not help but feel repulsion for this place, wherever it was. He could not remember anything about how he had gotten here, and that guard was making him nervous. He felt heartbreaking pain shooting all through him. He wanted to get away from this place, to hide, to forget this nightmarish. Daniel awoke near his knocked-over chair, his temples pounding and his body shaking with terror amidst falling medical records, shattering test tubes, and other gadgets that were settling onto the cold lab floor. The horror of the dream still filled his mind, and the doctor let out a primal scream, followed by a tear-filled groan. It wasn't until several hours later that the doctor had pulled himself together again. By then, he had organized the lab into a controlled clutter and was once again deep into his science. His head throbbed with agony as he forced himself to focus on the endless diagnostic printouts before him. He looked over every figure, repeated every one of his tests, viewed and reviewed all the data that the Reconcile had extracted from Alegna. And he was growing more confident that his efforts were simply in vain, when suddenly, "That's it! The cure!" Daniel jumped from his chair and began dancing in jubilation. "Oh, praises be! We're free! I've got to try to notify the Alegnans." He was overcome with dizziness and felt his knees buckle beneath him. Too much excitement," he assured himself, leaning against the lab table. He carefully made his haphazard way across the lab to the computer panel, a dopey grin playing on his face. "Computer, access communications. Any luck reaching Central Control or Planet Alegna?" Daniel stood by, waiting for the computer to carry out his command. The pain in his head had grown more intense. Probably all the shouting that he was doing, he thought. "Access denied," the computer indifferently informed him in monotone. Daniel's face suddenly became furious. "What do you mean, access denied?" Daniel screamed. The pressure in his head was so intense he could not think. "There's no reason you should keep denying me." He smashed his hands against the shatterproof screen and then moaned briefly. "Computer, this is acting Captain." And then he calmed himself and changed his inquiry. "Computer, ETA to Planet Alegna." After another moment, "ETA to Alegna, 23 hours. 23 hours? How could that be, he wondered. Just the morning the ETA had been 3 days, due to the engine damage that the botanist had caused. 23 hours? It could not be accurate unless... Daniel collected his nearly indecipherable notes, moving as quickly as his aching mind would allow. He was waiting in the hall for the ship's propulsion lift's doors to open and carry him safely to the bridge. His head burned with fever. Damned elevator. There's not even anyone left aboard. And it still takes an eternity, Daniel complained to himself. He was rubbing the side of his head fiercely with his right hand. The papers he held in his left hand were trembling and at last fell to the lift's floor as the doors opened.